Hey guys, tonight well, you already feel it, don't you? That soft, sandy hush settling over your shoulders, as if the entire desert has decided to exhale right behind you. You're standing at the edge of an ancient Nubian settlement at dawn, a place where the air still smells like last night's cooled stones and half-awake goats, and where each grain of sand somehow remembers more trade secrets than any merchant ever wrote down. The horizon is a wide, pale blur, like someone gently smudged gold dust across the sky with the heel of their palm, and you can hear the faintest clink of bronze rings on a camel's halter. Not in an alarming run-for-your-life way, but in a your day is about to get quietly weird way. And you're here to walk, well, trudge, into that long sweep of silence the ancient Nubian traders once treated like their own version of peaceful highways. Highways with no pavement, no traffic, and definitely no coffee stands. You probably wouldn't survive this in real life, by the way. Not because something dramatic would happen, but because after about 6 minutes, the heat would turn you into a very confused raisin. But for tonight, in the slow, sleepy version of history, you're sturdy enough, hydrated enough, and calm enough to wander those sand paths in peace. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, let me know your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone is drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun is sliding upward, inch by glowing inch, as you step beyond the settlement's woven reed fences. Your sandals kicking tiny puffs of dust that immediately settle back down like they're offended you disturb them. Nubian mornings have a way of wrapping around you. Not like a cozy blanket, but like a gentle reminder that shade is about to become the most precious substance in your life. Even now, before the real heat arrives, the earth is warm enough that you can't quite tell where the night ended. Behind you, someone finishes tying a water skin onto your pack. It's a leather thing with faint creases carved in from 100 similar trips. A little like your favorite tote bag, but significantly more life and death when you're days from the Nile. A veteran trader, let's call him Tarek, because every group needs at least one solid "I've seen some things" mentor, gives the strap a final tug and then nods with a slow authority. He has that expression that says, "You're definitely going to mess up at some point, but you'll do it politely." Mainstream fact time, delivered quietly, as promised. Nubian traders really did maintain desert routes that linked Central Africa with the Nile and beyond, long before the more famous Silk Road emerged to the north. These weren't formal roads so much as mental maps. Strings of oases, rock landmarks, dune shapes, and sky cues that only made sense if you'd grown up squinting at the horizon. But here's the quirky, fringe tidbit slipping in while you adjust your pack. Some traders swore the desert had moods, literal moods, not mystical, spell-casting moods, but "that dune looks grumpy today, let's walk around it" moods. Completely unscientific, but if you've ever avoided the aisle in a grocery store because it had too many loud people in it, you understand. Historians still argue whether these so-called desert moods were genuine beliefs or just jokes told around the fire to haze newcomers. You know, the ancient version of "go fetch skyhooks." You follow Tarek to the edge of a sandy ridge where the first faint line of the silent path spills forward, a pale thread, almost invisible. The route isn't carved or built or marked with cheerful signs. It's just understood. The same way you instinctively know which chair in a friend's living room is meant for guests and which one is where their cat would sue you for trespassing if you sat on it. Tarek gestures forward with a lazy sweep of his hand. We walked before the wind wakes. It's his poetic way of telling you that the moment the breeze starts tossing sand around, the path becomes a suggestion rather than a certainty. He steps out with a slow, practiced gait, one foot slightly grazing the sand before settling. Desert walkers learn not to stomp. Stomping wastes energy, which the desert treats like a snack. You follow, trying your best to mimic the glide. You look like a baby giraffe trying to moonwalk, but the effort is appreciated. Each step settles you deeper into the day's rhythm. Soft crunch, lift, soft crunch again. The breeze is still hiding somewhere below the horizon. As you walk, you pass one of the traders tightening the strings on a clay jar wrapped in wet cloth. It's evaporative cooling, ancient, effective, and basically the desert's version of putting your soda in a frosty, Instagram-worthy sleeve. A little mainstream mechanical magic. But the trader guarding it shoots you a look that says, "No touching," not even tapping it to hear the little slosh sound. Some things are sacred. Off to your right, the low silhouettes of rock formations break the monotony of sand, like the desert arranged in a minimalist sculpture garden. They serve as early markers of your route, telling you you're on track. One looks suspiciously like a loaf of bread, another weirdly resembles a sleeping hippo. Tarek claims the hippo one used to be taller, which sounds impossible, but erosion has been chewing on this place longer than human memory. As the sun continues to rise, light crawls over the dunes behind you, painting long shadows that stretch like sleepy cats across the sand. For a moment, you glance back and see the settlement shrinking into a cluster of reed roofs and quiet smoke trails. It looks peaceful in a way modern life rarely allows. No notifications, no traffic, nobody asking you to rate your experience. One of the younger traders jogs forward to match your pace. He's grinning in that "I know something you don't know" way, which is always concerning. He gestures toward the horizon, where a faint shimmer is beginning to appear. "Heat ghosts," he tells you proudly. Another quirky desert tidbit. Traders sometimes claimed the mirages were the spirits of old caravans, guiding or occasionally trolling the living. Historians still argue whether this was a religious idea or just an attempt to explain why distant oases always looked too close.
As the air warms, Tarek motions for everyone to pause. He scans the dunes with a practiced eye, noting the angle of shadow versus wind. "Soft sand ahead," he says quietly. You squint, but see only sand. Hard sand, soft sand, medium sand, neutral and motional support sand. It's all visually identical to you. But he's right. The next stretch is looser, ready to swallow your ankles in slow, passive-aggressive gulps. You shift the weight of your pack and join the others in a slight detour along the wind-packed ridge where the footing is firmer. Every so often, you hear the distant grumble of a camel, like it woke up annoyed that breakfast wasn't provided as to its exact standards. Camels, you're learning, are basically tall, sand-colored comedians with emotional range and zero desire to impress anyone. As the morning deepens, you stop briefly near a half-buried pile of dark stones, basalt chunks, remnants of an ancient camp. It's one of the subtle waypoints Nubian traders relied on. A mainstream fact slips in again. Some of these desert markers date back thousands of years, layered with the traces of successive cultures who moved goods, stories, and gossip across the region. Even now, archaeologists debate whether certain stacks of stones were trade markers, spiritual symbols, or, yep, this was the bathroom signs. Historians still argue whether some alignments served practical navigation or carried deeper ritual meaning. It's the desert version of discovering a weird drawing on a tree and wondering if it's a treasure map or just someone bored. Your feet settle into the rhythm as you begin the long, slow descent into a valley formed by two thick dunes. The air feels heavier here, as if the sun has found a small pocket to warm extra quickly. Someone hands you a scrap of cloth to tie across your neck for shade. You thank them, even though you now look like a desert bandit who forgot his main aesthetic. Smell-wise, the desert at this hour is surprisingly lively. Every so often you catch a hint of dry grass, or the mineral tang of stones recently cooled, or even the faint trace of someone's breakfast fire miles behind you. The desert carries scents in strange, surgical ways. One moment nothing, the next moment a full meal from a settlement you can't see. Someone in the caravan cracks a tiny joke about how this is the part of the journey where new walkers begin questioning their life choices. You smile politely, mostly because you're starting to understand what they mean. Your legs burn a little with each step, but not painfully. More like your muscles are whispering, "Hey, remember couches? Those were nice." By the time you crest the next dune, the light has shifted again. bright and sharp enough that the sand glitters in tiny flecks. The world is opening in slow motion. Gold, beige, and soft rose stretching toward a horizon that never quite sits still. And somewhere inside that sweep of colors, the silent routes stretch ahead unseen, waiting for your next steps.
You follow Torek deeper into the soft-ridged morning, where the sand shifts from chilly under your sandals to quietly warm, like it's been preheated for your inconvenience. You can feel the silent routes settling around you. Not in an obvious, here are the boundaries way, but more like a gentle suggestion the desert makes. The wind is still asleep, the dunes are holding their breath, and the traders around you fall into that slow, efficient rhythm that says, the day has officially begun. The silent routes were never formal, never carved, never guarded. They were just there, etched into memory, passed through calloused feet and steady glances. You learn this quickly, not through a lecture, but through how everyone else moves. They don't search for direction, they remember it. Their bodies remember, their eyes remember, their shadows fall in the right places. You, meanwhile, are mentally keeping track of the last rock that looked like a loaf of bread, because that's all you've got so far. Torek glances back to check on you. His smile is one of those patient, sympathetic ones people give toddlers trying to figure out coat zippers. Silent routes, he says quietly, teach themselves. A nice sentiment. You're just hoping they teach you before the sun turns everything into a giant convection oven. A mainstream fact floats into your mind, something Torek whispered earlier during breakfast, while you were still half asleep and trying to figure out why your bowl seemed to contain exactly 3 raisins and a philosophical amount of porridge. Many Nubian traders knew the desert pathways by reading subtle cues, changes in grain size, slight color shifts in the sand, the angle of morning shadows, even the habits of birds that only flew along certain hidden water lines. But that's the accessible version of the truth. The quirky version is less comforting. Some traders insisted that the sand talked, not in whispers, nothing spooky, more like ints. They'd say sand gets friendlier when it wants to be crossed, or cranky when storms are brewing. You're pretty sure this started as a metaphor, but knowing humans, someone somewhere definitely took it literally. Historians still argue whether these beliefs reflected spiritual interpretations of nature, or just a polite way to admit we don't understand half of what this place does. You try to listen now. The sand does not talk to you. At best, it gives you a long, judgmental silence. As your group spreads out slightly, you begin noticing how the veterans control the pace. No sprinting, no dragging, just a clean, almost hypnotic glide. Each step is light, sliding forward first, pressing down second, an entire choreography built around conserving energy. You start copying them again, and you look slightly less like a giraffe doing experimental dance. Slightly. The desert around you widens into a series of shallow basins, carved by centuries of wind. You walk along the high edges, where the sand is packed tight. Every now and then, someone points out something meaningful. A dark vein of mineral threading beneath the surface, a tuft of dry bush clinging to life, or the faint outline of a long faded track. Each clue helps the route materialize, piece by subtle piece. At one point, you spot a tiny line of beetle tracks weaving through the sand. They look insignificant, but Tarek pauses to inspect them, nodding once. "These only walk where the ground is firm," he murmurs. "Good sign." Congratulations, you are now taking navigation advice from a beetle you'll never meet. Far ahead, you can see 2 traders walking close together, comparing notes. They're arguing quietly, something about the position of a ridge compared to last season. This is where the scholarly debate slips in. Historians still argue whether the Nubian silent routes shifted dramatically over decades due to migrating dunes,
or whether traders simply prefer different seasonal paths depending on politics and water sources. The dunes here move unpredictably, and some portions of the routes may have disappeared under shifting sands, only to re-emerge centuries later. Tarek calls you over toward the left, where the sand changes tone from warm beige to a faintly grayish tint. This is old ground, he explains. The wind rarely touches it. You kneel and let your fingers sift through it. It's slightly coarser, holding shape better, the kind of sand that doesn't eat your foot whole. You nod like you totally knew that before he pointed it out. A stray gust finally stirs, brushing against your face like a lazy cat deciding whether it wants attention. The caravan reacts instantly. Some tighten their scarves. Others adjust their path by a few careful degrees. You wouldn't have noticed anything, but apparently this tiny wind is the first whisper of a midday change. You feel oddly proud that you noticed the wind at all. Progress. As the warmth grows, the traders begin humming. Soft, meandering tunes with no real beginning or end. The melodies drift over the dunes like loose threads. You fall into step, letting the rhythm help your feet settle into the glide again. It's oddly soothing, and about 3 minutes in, you realize you're humming, too. Someone chuckles behind you. First time? You nodded. You sound like a goat learning to sing. Rude, but fair. A little further on, Tarek stops the group and crouches by a faint depression in the sand. You lean close and see almost nothing, a subtle dip, barely perceptible. But he traces it with his fingers and smiles. Old Drax, he murmurs. How old, you ask. He shrugs. Maybe yesterday, maybe a century. Super comforting. He explains that the desert has bizarre rules about memory. Hard-packed tracks from carts or heavy animals can survive for ages, protected by wind patterns or sand crust. Meanwhile, your extremely visible footprints from 5 minutes ago are already softening like they've been photoshopped away. You try to imagine walking the same path repeatedly over years, learning it well enough that even changes in dune shape or season wouldn't confuse you. It feels impossible from where you're standing, staring at the ever-shifting landscape. But to these traders, the silent routes are like a favorite walking path back home, except with more existential risk and fewer restrooms. A camel wanders close and snorts directly in your ear, as if evaluating whether you're worth its time. Its breath smells like it's been eating things the universe never intended to be food. The caravan laughs as you recoil slightly. To be fair, you've just been insulted by a creature that behaves like a tall, arrogant sofa with legs.
As the sun climbs, you feel your body adjusting, your steps becoming lighter, your breaths deeper, your awareness spreading wider across the terrain. It's not natural talent, it's survival. You pass another subtle landmark, a cluster of stones half buried in a crescent pattern. They're arranged too deliberately to be random. A mainstream historical fact eases in. Nubian traders sometimes left these formations to mark safe paths, water access, or sites of danger. They didn't leave inscriptions or fancy carvings. They trusted memory and community more than written markers. But the fringe theory? Some believe these stones were placed according to astronomical alignments, guiding travelers seasonally by the tilt of starlight. Historians still argue whether this is true or whether some archaeologists simply had too much coffee before their dig. Either way, Tarek taps the stones, nods toward the east, and walks on. Hours pass, but because your pace is steady and the company is quietly warm, you barely feel the distance piling up. The caravan spreads out again, each person adjusting position based on wind, shade angle, and the soft reading of the route. You're officially learning the silent routes now, not by map, not by instruction, but by immersion. Your feet find firmer ground. Your breathing sinks with the caravan's lull. Your eyes start catching the tiny cues, the darker ridge, the wind-combed sand, the way the dunes gather like waves frozen mid-crest. Somewhere behind you, someone starts joking about how new travelers always panic the first time they look back and see the disappearing footprints. You glance behind you instinctively, and yes, the tracks really are fading into a soft blur already. It should be unsettling, but it's weirdly calming. The desert prefers clean pages, apparently. Tarek slows beside you. You're learning, he murmurs. Slowly, but well. You beam like an overachieving student. And with that, the caravan moves onward, deeper into the unwritten pathways that have carried centuries of footsteps through silence, sunlight, and stories still drifting in the dunes. You reach the first oasis long after the sun has settled into its full, glowing confidence, the kind that says, "Yes, I'm here, and no, I don't care how sweaty you already are." The air around you flickers slightly with heat shimmer, like the desert is blurring your vision just enough to remind you who's in charge. But then, as though the sand finally takes pity, the ground dips, the dunes soften, and a sudden cluster of palms appears, green, improbable, and quietly triumphant. The caravan begins to relax in a way you feel immediately. Shoulders drop, packs loosen. Camels sigh like they've been holding their breath for miles. The whole place feels like a secret that everyone already knows, but still loves discovering all over again. Tarek nudges you forward. "This is Kennet Oasis," he says. "Small, but old." You look around. It doesn't look old. It looks stubbornly alive. A shallow pool reflects strips of blue sky, ringed by reeds and three tilted palm trunks that seem to lean conspiratorially towards each other, as if sharing gossip about every traveler who stops here. Traders start unloading small bundles near the shade, spreading mats, shaking sand from their clothes. Someone even laughs, a warm, tired laugh that says the desert hasn't fully defeated them today. You settle beneath a palm, and the relief is immediate. The shade wraps around you like a thin blanket that isn't heavy enough to make you sleep, but is still exactly what you needed. This is where the silent routes become something more than pathways. This is where they gain memory. Oases along Nubian trade lines were more than watering holes. They were libraries, though not book kind, obviously. They stored directions, warnings, bargains, local news, seasonal updates, and occasionally the dramatic retelling of who tripped over whose camel the week before. Traders didn't write things down because written markers wouldn't survive the shifting sands anyway. Instead, information survived in voices, gestures, and repeated retellings. A mainstream historical fact comes drifting in as you sip water from a shared jug. Many Nubian oases like this served as informal hubs where caravans exchanged knowledge about weather patterns, political tensions between river cities, and the safest dune corridors for the week. These hubs kept entire networks alive, not through force, but through conversation. But the oasis also holds quirkier traditions. Tarek points out a small pile of pebbles arranged in a spiral near the pool. He explains, a message. Travelers leave these for friends. Apparently, the number of stones, their shape, or even the direction of the spiral could signal things like, "I left 2 days ago," or "Water is clean today," or even, "Beware of the man with the suspiciously handsome goat." You ask Tarek if that last one is a joke. He says nothing. You're concerned. Nearby, an older trader named Malu reclines on a woven mat, his beard decorated with tiny bits of silver thread. He waves you over with a gesture that feels both welcoming and slightly theatrical, like he's been waiting his whole life to deliver some grand stories to an unsuspecting listener. "You're new to the sand," he says. You nod. He hums approvingly. "Then you must learn the way oases remember." You lean in as he begins telling a story about Kennet Oasis,
the kind with shifting details, drifting memories, and embellishments so casual he probably isn't aware he's doing them.
According to Malu, and according to my grandfather's grandfather's grandfather, a phrase he repeats so often you start questioning math, this oasis used to be twice as large. 3 springs bubbled here, not 1. Traders would gather in the hundreds, forming a temporary city of whispers, deals, and some truly questionable stew. Historians still argue whether these accounts exaggerate the size of ancient Nubian oases or whether climate fluctuations really did shrink water sources dramatically over centuries. You can't help noticing how Malu's version seems to grow every time he blinks. 3 springs, no 4! He squints. Maybe 5. Meanwhile, Tarek subtly shakes his head behind Malu, mouthing, it was 2, at most. You decide not to ruin the old man's fun. Another quirky tidbit emerges when someone brings out a small clay bowl filled with herbs. The scent is sharp and earthy, like someone mixed mint leaves with optimism. Traders take turns inhaling deeply, not eating it, just smelling it. Tarek explains this was a traditional desert refresher. It supposedly clears the mind and sharpens your ability to read the sands. You take a cautious sniff. Your mind feels about as clear as a frosted window, but sure, maybe it works for people with more survival instincts. The oasis gradually fills with low voices and drifting trade chatter. A mother pours water over her child's dusty curls, laughing softly. A craftsman repairs a leather scrap with tiny, precise motions. A camel stands in the shade with its chin lifted dramatically, giving the impression that it considers the oasis far too simple for a creature of its elegance. Traders begin sharing route updates, each snippet of information carrying real weight. One man claims to have seen smoke pillars near a distant ridge, maybe bandits, maybe a caravan burning saltbrush for warmth. Another swears the northern dunes shifted unusually far last month, creeping almost a full day's journey into familiar ground. Malu scoffs loudly. Dunes do not creep that far, he declares. Last season they did, someone replies. Nonsense. They are dunes, not rebellious children. We followed the old path and found nothing but sand. Everything is sand, Malu retorts. That proves nothing. You can't argue with that logic. This exchange drops you directly into another scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the desert's shifting patterns changed caravan routes dramatically from year to year, or whether traders simply adapted to political or economic changes instead. The truth probably lies in between, but listening to these men talk, you suspect the dunes themselves might be keeping secrets out of sheer boredom. You wander toward the pool, noticing how the water holds a thin layer of reflected sky, as if it borrowed color for the afternoon. A few fish, tiny, almost translucent, dart beneath the surface. You blink. Fish. In the middle of relentless sand. It feels like finding a small, living punchline delivered by the universe. A woman kneels beside you, filling a gourd. They survive everything, she says, catching your stare. You nod. Impressive. More than some traders, she adds dryly. Somewhere across the oasis, laughter erupts again. A man is animatedly retelling how he once slept so deeply beside this pool that a passing camel mistook him for a rock and tried to sit on him. It's unclear how much of the story is true, but the reenactment, which includes the man lying dramatically on the ground while another trader pretends to be a camel, is worth the audience it gathers.
Another mainstream detail floats in as you listen. Oases served as key rest points for caravans moving goods such as incense, pottery, gold flakes, mineral pigments, and animal hides. Before entering or exiting a Silk Road, traders used these spots to check supplies, confirm alliances, and sometimes renegotiate who would lead the next leg of the journey. But Malu taps your arm and leans closer, as if sharing a deep secret. You know the real purpose of an oasis? You prepare for wisdom. It is where you learn who snores loudest.
You resist the urge to glance around and identify suspects. As the afternoon hangs lazily overhead, more travelers arrive, some from the north, others from the west. They blend almost immediately into the rhythm of the place. Every newcomer gets the same treatment. Water first, questions later. Only once they've settled does the real exchange begin. The conversations float around you like slow-moving currents. "Did you hear the king raise river tolls again?" "I heard his cousin raise them. The king is too busy hunting." "No, it was the scribes. They miscounted the tax stones." "Scribes always miscount the tax stones." You learn that nobody trusts scribes. Even the scribes don't trust scribes. Someone else shares a rumor that a wealthy merchant recently brought a dancing monkey from far up the Nile and tried to teach it to sort beads. Historians, for the record, still argue whether Nubian traders actually kept trained animals for entertainment, or whether this is another case of someone getting bored and inventing peculiar anecdotes to impress travelers. The oasis continues to feel like the desert's version of a marketplace, minus stalls, minus walls, minus any structure that suggests order. But it's a marketplace of stories, warnings, jokes, directions, and the occasional argument about who misplaced a cooking pot. As the day slides into late afternoon, the shadows lengthen. A few traders begin napping under palms, their breaths slow and even. You find a comfortable patch of shade and stretch out, letting the heat drain from your shoulders. The hum of voices becomes a gentle blur behind you. Before you drift too far, Tarek sits down beside you with a waterskin. "Remember," he says softly, "oases are memory. The desert forgets, but we don't." A breeze moves through the palms, lifting a few loose strands of hair from your forehead. The leaves rustle with a sound that's half whisper, half lullaby. You feel a deep, grounding ease settle into you, a sense that even though you're far out in an unforgiving landscape, you're not lost, not today. Whether it's the shade, the voices, or the tiny fishes mocking the desert's dryness by simply existing, you're not sure. But the oasis feels like a quiet friend that asks nothing from you except your presence. Tomorrow you'll leave it behind, stepping again onto the shifting sand paths that demand patience and attention. But for now, you belong exactly where you are, resting in a pocket of life carved into a world built almost entirely of silence. And somehow, the silence feels like it's welcoming you in.
You rise from the oasis with a newfound awareness of how subtle the desert can be. Your muscles have relaxed in the shade, but now they pulse gently with readiness for another stretch of walking. Camels stretch and shake sand from their fur, as if signaling, "All right, time to continue, humans." The caravan reforms in a quiet procession, each traveler stepping carefully back onto the shifting sand, the trail already etched in memories rather than footprints. Caravans were living ecosystems, and today you are part of one. Your role is simple: walk, watch, and absorb. But it's also complicated. Each camel has preferences, each trader has habits, and every bundle of goods behaves differently under the subtle inclines of dunes. You notice that the camels with braided forelocks are slightly more stubborn. The ones carrying heavier sacks tend to hum low, almost musical grumbles, as though protesting in secret code. Historians still argue whether traders actively selected camels for temperament, or if stories about temperamental camels are just modern embellishments of oral tradition. As the caravan snakes along a shallow valley, Tarek gestures toward the arrangement of goods on one of the camels. Incense and mineral pigments sit at the top, carefully packed to avoid crushing. Animal hides and woven mats are tucked below. You realize that every item's placement has been refined over generations, not only for protection, but for rhythm. The sway of a properly loaded camel matches the pace of human walking almost perfectly, making the entire caravan feel like a single, breathing organism. You stumble slightly over a ridge and laugh quietly at your own lack of rhythm. A trader behind you smirks and says, "You'll find your cadence eventually. The camels have patience, but not forever." Another mainstream fact comes to mind. Medieval Nubian caravans often stretched over kilometers, yet maintained cohesion through rhythm and sightlines rather than vocal commands. A glance, a nod, a shared moment of pause. These subtle cues kept traders and camels synchronized even in the blistering heat. The quirky fringe? Some traders claimed that camels understood hierarchy by scent, recognizing leaders without ever seeing their face. While it sounds fanciful, Tarek swears that certain camels consistently position themselves near the head of the line based on more than visual cues. Historians still argue whether this was intentional training, behavioral instinct, or simply folklore amplified over countless stories told around desert fires. You trudge beside a camel carrying small baskets of dried dates. Their sweet aroma drifts towards you intermittently, making you suddenly aware of hunger, thirst, and the absurd comfort of air itself. A small joke floats through the caravan. Someone quips that the camels are clearly hoarding all edible scents to tease new travelers. You grin, though you know the truth is far less conspiratorial. It's the desert's natural olfactory mischief. The rhythm of walking, swaying, and navigating begins to lull your thoughts into a gentle trance. You notice the way shadows stretch across the ridges, how a distant dune appears almost like a sleeping giant, and how the wind, when it finally stirs, behaves like a soft sigh brushing over the caravan. Even the faint sound of a distant bird takes on an oddly musical cadence, almost part of the caravan's organic rhythm.
At a slight bend in the sand, Tarek pauses and points to a rock formation resembling a chair with a missing leg. "We use landmarks like this to measure distance," he explains. "If you miscount, you'll end up walking the same stretch twice." You nod, pretending that your mental math is accurate, though the heat and gentle hum of movement have blurred your numerical confidence. The caravan splits briefly as some traders inspect a shallow depression in the sand. Footprints are barely visible. A small mound of darker soil marks where someone once paused or buried something, perhaps a cache, perhaps a casual placement of forgotten tools. You lean down, running your fingers across the sand. It feels oddly alive, like it remembers. Another mainstream fact drifts in. Nubian traders occasionally used small buried markers, piles of stones, minor indentations, and crushed vegetation to indicate subtle changes en route or warn of difficult terrain ahead. These signs were temporary, but visible enough to guide the practiced eye. And here comes the quirk. Some records suggest that certain traders would deliberately mislead competitors or curious onlookers by planting fake markers only to remove them later. It's like a centuries-old desert game of hide-and-seek with high stakes. Historians still argue how prevalent these playful or strategic deceptions truly were, given the lack of surviving written documentation. You find yourself following Tarek closely, not only to keep pace, but to study his hand movements. He points subtly to grains of sand that are slightly larger, indicating firmer ground. He adjusts his step based on the slope of the dune, almost imperceptibly, and his body seems to hum with the desert itself. You realize that the rhythm isn't just for cohesion, it's a map. The pace, sway, and direction all encode information about the landscape, hazards, and subtle shifts in terrain. As you trudge over a shallow rise, the afternoon sun warms your back. You notice a faint shimmer on a distant dune. Heat mirages again, teasing the eye with the promise of water where none exists. Traders pass by without comment, seemingly immune to the optical illusions. You feel grateful for their experience, or maybe just jealous. The caravan halts near a small depression where a lone tree has survived, improbably, against wind and heat. Traders gather around, unpacking modest rations and adjusting loads. Camels bend down to nibble sparse leaves, making soft, almost comical sounds. You watch,
feeling a strange camaraderie with the animals, as if mutual survival has quietly knit you all together. A fringe tradition becomes clear. Some traders swore that approaching the oasis or a lone tree in a depression required a small offering, a grain of salt, a date, a whispered acknowledgement, lest the desert be offended. You consider dropping a pebble from your pack, just in case. Historians still argue whether such practices were superstitions or practical cues to pause and survey the land, reducing accidents and missteps. After a brief rest, you notice conversations begin drifting toward the goods themselves. Discussions of weight, placement, and the subtle nuances of bartering before the next major stop. A bundle of incense is examined, a clay jar adjusted, and a handful of dried fruit sorted carefully. Every action seems ceremonial in its precision, a quiet choreography linking humans, animals, and objects in shared purpose.
You trudge along again, rejoining the rhythm of the caravan. Each step feels slightly easier now, as if your body has started syncing to the invisible pulse that carries the group forward. The dunes rise and fall like slow waves, and you realize that the journey itself has become a meditative repetition, gentle enough to almost lull the mind, even as it trains the body. Occasionally, a trader mutters a small joke about the stubbornness of camels or the eccentricity of sand formations. The humor is soft, blending with the hum of walking and the faint whisper of wind, never loud enough to disturb the desert's calm. You smile, realizing that even subtle laughter serves as a kind of guidance, reminders to stay alert, yet relaxed, aware, yet unhurried. As the sun starts its slow descent, you glance back and see the path you've traversed. Footprints are already fading, erased by heat, wind, and time. You catch Tarek's eye, and he nods almost imperceptibly. You're seeing it, not just walking, but reading. It's a quiet affirmation, and for the first time, you feel like you're not merely a visitor, but a participant in something older, slower, and infinitely more patient than yourself. The evening sun softens into a gentle glow, painting the dunes in muted golds and faint rose tones that seem too delicate for such a harsh landscape. You notice the shadows stretch long and thin, curling over the ridges in ways that almost feel intentional, like the desert is subtly guiding you toward the next point of interest. Your pace is slow, deliberate, a kind of trance that comes naturally after hours of following the rhythm of the caravan. You feel every nuance of the sand beneath your feet, the fine, almost silky particles, the rough patches where wind has hardened the surface, the tiny depressions left by long-gone creatures. Each step is a conversation with the land, though it speaks in silence. Tarek signals a slight turn to the right. Ahead, a series of low dunes converge around what looks like a faintly glimmering ridge. "This is the old riverbed," he murmurs. You lean forward, squinting. It is subtle, barely a dip, barely a mark, yet the experienced eye detects it instantly. An ancient Nubian trader often navigated by these dry riverbeds, which served as natural highways through otherwise uncharted deserts. They provided firmer ground, occasional water retention, and clues about seasonal floods that could either help or hinder a caravan's progress. A quirky detail emerges as you observe. Some traders would leave tiny carved wooden markers, barely visible unless you knew what to look for, to indicate water sources or safer paths. Some of these markers were simple geometric shapes, others abstract figures resembling animals or objects. Historians still argue whether these carvings were utilitarian or also served as a playful form of artistic expression for travelers who spent weeks or months in isolation. You bend down to examine a faintly protruding stick from the sand, realizing it could very well be one of these subtle signals. The caravan moves slowly through the ancient riverbed. Camels adjust their footing with delicate precision, and you follow, noticing for the first time how the rhythm of the line mirrors the subtle undulations of the sand. Each step feels less like a physical effort and more like a gentle sway. Occasionally, you hear a faint chuckle or a soft whisper between traders, discussing past journeys, mishaps, or the occasional odd animal encounter. Their voices blend into a low, soothing background hum, almost like a lullaby performed by the desert itself. You stumble slightly over a small mound of sand and glance down, noticing a pattern of tracks nearly invisible to the untrained eye. Tark leans close and whispers, "Foxes, rare but persistent, always following water sources." You pause to marvel at how these small details, tiny footprints, subtle color variations, slight shifts in terrain carry such a weight of information. The desert is not empty. It is teeming with quiet, almost invisible life, all of which traders had to interpret to survive. A fringe story drifts into the conversation. Malu, ever fond of embellishment, once claimed a sand fox led his caravan out of a sudden storm. Or perhaps, Tariq adds with a smirk, he just wanted to show off. Historians still debate whether such accounts of animals guiding human travelers were based on observed behaviors or simply folklore passed down to keep young traders alert and entertained. You find yourself smiling at the thought of a tiny, clever fox taking credit for desert navigation.
As the sun sinks further, the landscape shifts from harsh golds to muted purples and dusky blues. Your eyes, adjusting to the change in light, catch the subtle curves and hidden pockets of the terrain. You start noticing how the dunes create almost natural amphitheaters, spaces where wind whispers differently, where heat lingers longer, and where shadows seem to dance in slow motion. The caravan navigates these spaces intuitively, almost instinctively. You reach a small plateau where the sand appears darker and more compacted. Tariq gestures toward the horizon. "Look there," he says. "That's where the next oasis lies, hidden beyond that ridge." You peer ahead and see only faint ripples of heat, a gentle shimmer that might be water, or might be an optical illusion designed by the desert to test your patience. You've learned by now not to question it too deeply. The mirages themselves are part of the experience. A mainstream historical detail emerges as you consider the oasis. Oases along these silent routes were not just water sources. They acted as informal checkpoints, places where caravans could exchange messages, share news of distant cities, and ensure that no route went unmonitored. Traders developed sophisticated systems of communication, sometimes through subtle visual cues, sometimes through sound, sometimes through the careful placement of objects that allowed news to travel faster than any single individual could move. But the quirky detail is almost charming. Some traders would leave small sculptures made of clay or twisted palm fibers, believing that these tiny figures brought luck or safety to the travelers who followed. You catch a glimpse of one such figure partially buried in sand, a miniature humanoid form, arms raised as if waving encouragement. Historians still argue whether these objects served purely spiritual purposes or were simple tools to mark routes, but either way, they bring a human touch to the otherwise stark landscape. The caravan reaches a gentle descent into a narrow valley. Shadows lengthen and deepen, wrapping the path in muted contrast. You notice how the sand changes texture subtly, finer, cooler, with a slight stickiness as moisture from the hidden underground spring makes itself known. Camels adjust their footing carefully, and you follow, feeling the soft give beneath each step. The rhythm continues, steady and hypnotic, with a low, constant hum of movement, discussion, and soft laughter. You pause to rest for a moment, crouching by a small ridge.
The air is quiet, except for the wind teasing the sand in low, playful murmurs. Someone cracks a soft joke about how long a trader would take to teach a camel to read a map, eliciting quiet chuckles from those nearby. The humor is gentle, designed not to startle, but to ease the mind, a practice refined over countless journeys. You glance at Tarek, who's examining a faint pattern in the sand. Tracks from last season, or maybe from 2 seasons ago. Hard to tell. The desert doesn't keep calendars. The statement makes you smile. There's a kind of freedom in the desert's disregard for time. It doesn't rush, doesn't care, doesn't judge. Your own sense of time loosens, and you begin to measure the day by the quality of light, the sound of wind, and the alignment of the caravan, rather than by hours or minutes.
As you continue, the sun dips lower, casting long shadows across the dunes. You notice the way the sand changes color depending on the angle of light, a subtle gradient of ochre, rose, and violet. The caravan pauses briefly to adjust loads, share small bites of food, and check water supplies. Each action is deliberate, careful, and almost ceremonial. A rhythm passed down through generations designed to keep humans and animals in harmony with the harsh environment. A fringe detail floats into your awareness. Some traders believed that certain dunes could remember past travelers, subtly guiding or resisting them based on previous movements. Historians still debate whether this is metaphorical or based on practical observations of wind patterns, sand compaction, and vegetation growth. Regardless, the idea adds a layer of mystique to the journey. You can't help glancing at the dunes, half expecting them to acknowledge your passage in some quiet, unspoken way. The caravan finally descends toward the oasis visible on the horizon. You notice a faint shimmer that grows more defined with each step, revealing a cluster of palms and a small reflective pool. Relief settles in, a tangible endpoint after the long stretch across the dry riverbed. Camels pick up their pace slightly, eager for water and shade, and the traders follow suit with a quiet but palpable anticipation. You take a deep breath, feeling the soft, warm wind against your skin, the faint scent of palm and moisture, and the gentle pull of exhaustion. There is satisfaction in arrival, and seeing the oasis materialize after hours of careful navigation, and in knowing that every detail, the sand, the animals, the subtle markers, has led you here. The caravan gathers around the water, camels kneeling to drink, traders stretching and whispering, and you realize that the silent routes are more than pathways. They are experiences, living lessons in observation, patience, and quiet camaraderie. Each step, each observation, each tiny interaction builds a map that is not written on paper, but etched into memory, rhythm, and story. As the sun dips behind distant dunes, painting the horizon in soft purples and golds, you rest beside the oasis, feeling both the exhaustion and the gentle satisfaction of participating in an ancient tradition. Tomorrow, the silent routes will continue, and you will follow them with slightly more confidence, slightly more awareness, and slightly more rhythm than before. You leave the oasis with the sun now firmly past its peak, spilling mellow warmth rather than the fierce glare of midday. The sand beneath your feet has cooled slightly, offering a more forgiving surface, though the dunes still demand careful attention. Camels plod steadily, their hooves pressing into the compacted sand and leaving impressions that will soon fade like whispers. You find yourself matching their rhythm unconsciously, feeling the sway of their bodies echo in your own. The silent routes, you realize, are as much about attuning yourself to living beings as they are about reading the landscape. Tarek walks slightly ahead, occasionally glancing back to ensure your pace is steady. Notice how the sand behaves differently after an oasis, he says. You nod, focusing on the subtle change in texture, the compacted layer, the faintly darker tone, the way grains seem to cling more closely. Mainstream historical records note that Nubian traders observed these variations carefully, adjusting routes and caravan speed accordingly. Moisture and vegetation remnants could make the difference between a smooth trek and a misstep that would throw a camel off balance. You pause to observe a slight depression in the sand, where a patch of grass survives against all odds. Tarek kneels beside it, tapping gently. Life finds a way, even here, and we find our way by noticing it. The fringe detail emerges here. Some traders would interpret these tiny, resilient plants as subtle markers of hidden water or fertile sand, believing that the desert itself was whispering guidance. Historians still debate whether these interpretations were symbolic or based on repeated empirical observation. Either way, you feel compelled to notice. As the caravan stretches across a narrow pass, you notice the light shifting, brushing dune crests in soft gradients that almost appear painted. Shadows deepen, and you start sensing distances in ways you didn't before. Small ridges become reference points. Color shifts indicate subtle changes in slope, and faint wind patterns hint at hidden dips in the sand. This skill is vital. Experienced traders navigated without maps, relying on memory, observation, and intuition, honed over decades. A playful moment occurs as a younger trader, clearly new to the routine, attempts to lead a camel around a minor incline. The camel balks, planting its feet stubbornly in the sand. The group laughs quietly, a gentle humor meant to soothe rather than embarrass. You grin, noting that even in a harsh environment, laughter serves as a stabilizing rhythm. The caravan pauses briefly near a slight ridge. You crouch to inspect the sand and see faint traces of other travelers' paths. Tarek points out subtle differences. Some tracks are older, deeper, compressed in a way that suggests multiple camels passed. Others are recent, barely pressing the grains. The mainstream fact here is clear. Reading the traces of prior travelers allowed caravans to gauge safety, water proximity, and terrain stability. It was both a survival strategy and a form of nonverbal communication across time. The quirky addition? Some traders swore that the desert played games with footprints, subtly shifting them with wind and heat to mislead unwary travelers. Historians still argue how much of this was practical observation versus poetic exaggeration, but the idea resonates. You already feel the sand's playful nature in the way it resists uniformity, hiding small clues in plain sight.
The late afternoon brings another gentle heat, offset by faint gusts that ripple across the dunes. You adjust your scarf, grateful for the slight breeze, and notice how the light softens further, casting elongated shadows that make the terrain appear undulating and almost alive. Each dune seems to have its own personality, some stubbornly rigid, others pliant and shifting under minimal pressure. You marvel at how traders could memorize these subtle characteristics and incorporate them into long-term navigation. The caravan enters a shallow basin. Camels move with careful precision, humans adjusting to their sway. Tarek occasionally signals with a small gesture, slight hand tilt, finger point, or step change, communicating details invisible to your untrained eye. This is part of the silent route's magic. Subtle gestures and small observations coordinate an entire caravan without spoken words. You try mimicking these movements, realizing how much they align with the flow of the dunes themselves. Malu, the embellisher, arrives at your side, offering a soft anecdote about a camel that supposedly knew the route better than its owner. Or Maybe it just like the music of our footsteps, he says with a wink. You laugh quietly, enjoying the gentle humor woven through generations of desert storytelling. The anecdote reminds you that knowledge of the silent routes was as much oral and sensory as it was practical. A mainstream observation comes to mind. Nubian caravans often relied on multi-generational memory. Routes, water sources, and seasonal variations were taught by elders to younger traders, embedding information in stories, jokes, and casual conversation. You see this pattern unfolding naturally as Tariq moves with experience, Malu interjects humorously, and younger traders observe quietly. The quirky tidbit emerges when you notice a faint arrangement of stones along the path, almost forming a pattern like a small spiral. Tariq explains that such markers were occasionally left to indicate subtle hazards like soft sand patches or sudden depressions, though some traders insisted they also brought luck. Historians still argue whether these markers were primarily practical or imbued with symbolic meaning, but either way, the gesture is charming, a reminder that humans leave traces even in the most unforgiving landscapes. The caravan begins a gentle ascent onto a ridge. Camels sway slightly, their rhythm unbroken, while traders adjust loads and pace. The desert stretches vast around you, and the quiet hum of the caravan mingles with distant wind sounds, creating a soothing, hypnotic pattern. You notice how the rhythm of walking, breathing, and subtle interaction seems almost meditative, lulling both body and mind into a comfortable awareness. A soft joke drifts from the rear of the caravan. Someone whispers about how new travelers always overpack, burdening camels unnecessarily. Laughter ripples quietly through the line. You realize that humor, like observation, is a tool of the silent routes, keeping morale high while fostering a sense of shared experience. As the ridge levels, the caravan spreads out slightly. The late light casts long, undulating shadows that make the dunes appear as if breathing slowly. You pause for a moment, taking in the scene, the compacted sand, the subtle wind patterns, the interplay of light and shadow, the quiet communication of humans and animals. Everything seems interconnected.
Another fringe detail surfaces. Some traders claim that certain dunes remembered patterns of passage, subtly shifting to reward attentive travelers or challenge the unwary. Historians still debate whether this is metaphorical, psychological, or based on keen observations of wind and sand behavior. Regardless, the notion adds a poetic layer to the journey, enhancing your appreciation of the environment. The sun dips lower, casting a golden haze across distant dunes. You feel a gentle fatigue, a satisfying exhaustion born of careful observation, steady walking, and subtle mental engagement. The caravan slows, adjusting pace to the approaching evening. Camels kneel occasionally, humans stretch, and a quiet hum of conversation lingers in the air, soft and soothing. You glance at Tariq, who smiles faintly. "You're beginning to see the desert," he says, "not just walk it." The statement resonates, settling like a soft weight in your chest. You are learning, attuning, observing, and participating, not merely traversing sand, but engaging with an intricate web of life, memory, and rhythm that has persisted for centuries. The ridge opens to a slight plateau, hinting at another hidden oasis in the distance. The promise of water and shade draws the caravan forward, and you feel a subtle anticipation, not of necessity,
but of continuity, the satisfaction of progression along a silent, patient path.
The plateau stretches ahead like a gentle promise, undulating in soft waves of beige and gold, each ridge flowing into the next with an almost imperceptible rhythm. You trudge forward, shoulders relaxed but alert, following the caravan's subtle cadence. The wind carries the faint scent of distant palms, an invisible marker signaling the proximity of the next oasis. Camels sway in time with the rhythm of your steps, and for a moment, you feel as if the entire desert is moving with you, its soft hum aligning with your heartbeat. Tarek glances over his shoulder, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Notice how the light shifts as you approach water," he says. You squint, observing the faint shimmer that plays across the distant sand. Mainstream historical evidence shows that Nubian traders developed an uncanny ability to detect these shifts, interpreting mirages, glints, and subtle changes in color to anticipate water sources hours before they became visible. This skill was essential. Survival depended on perception as much as preparation. You spot a small cluster of stones along the path, arranged with deliberate care. Tarek points subtly with a gloved finger. "Markers," he whispers, almost conspiratorially. The fringe detail? Some traders would place these stones in cryptic sequences, signaling danger, direction, or even the presence of hidden game. Historians still debate whether such markings were practical, symbolic, or a mix of both, but you find yourself instinctively interpreting them with reverence and caution. The late afternoon sun begins its slow descent, casting long shadows across the plateau. You notice how the sand changes in hue, the subtle interplay between warm and cool tones highlighting textures previously invisible. Each ripple, depression, and crest of sand tells a story, offering clues to both travelers and historians. The silent routes are living textbooks, if one knows how to read them. The caravan halts near a gentle incline. Camels kneel, stretching and shaking off sand, their rhythmic movements blending with the low murmur of traders adjusting packs and checking loads. You crouch to examine the sand, observing faint animal tracks, lizards, desert foxes, and tiny insects whose presence often goes unnoticed. This attention to small details, a mainstream historical practice, ensured traders could predict environmental changes, from sudden storms to shifting dunes. Quirkier practices emerge as Malou sidles up, a sly smile on his face. He says, "Whisper to the camels at this point," voice soft and conspiratorial. You raise an eyebrow. "Whisper?" He nods solemnly. "Not commands, stories, encouragement, old advice passed from one generation to the next." Historians still argue whether such rituals were symbolic, practical, or simply a way to maintain morale, but it leaves you imagining camels absorbing centuries of wisdom in hushed tones. You continue walking, adjusting to the gentle incline. The sun now hovers low, softening the heat but elongating shadows in unusual ways. Tarek signals a slight detour around a faint depression. He says, "Sand shifts unpredictably here. Observe the grains." You kneel, letting your fingers graze the surface. The difference is subtle. Some grains are coarser, some finer, some damp, some dry. Each variation conveys information to traders trained to decode such textures.
The caravan begins a slow descent toward a shallow valley where the next oasis hides like a mirage becoming reality. You notice faint ripples in the sand, previous travelers, wind patterns, and the passage of small desert creatures intersecting in chaotic harmony. A fringe tradition insists that observing these patterns carefully allows one to predict safe paths and avoid hidden soft patches or sudden drops. Historians still debate the validity of these claims, though the attention to detail clearly enhanced survival. A soft breeze carries the faint aroma of wild herbs growing near the oasis. Traders sniff casually, noting the quality and abundance. Camels pause instinctively, heads lifting to detect distant water or the faint scent of salt. You realize the caravan is not merely moving, it's engaging in a form of natural observation science, centuries ahead of any formal methodology. You spot a tiny clay figurine partially buried in the sand, a humanoid form with raised arms, delicate and intentionally placed. Derek explains that some traders left such charms to signal safe passage or to bring luck. The mainstream fact is that these markers occasionally helped lost travelers find their way, while the quirky element is that some were designed to amuse or trick those unfamiliar with the system. Historians still argue over how widespread this practice was, but it adds a playful dimension to the desert's rigor. The caravan approaches the oasis slowly. Palms come into view, clustered protectively around a small reflective pool. Camels pick up the pace slightly, aware of approaching water, while traders adjust their loads in anticipation. You notice the shadows of the palms stretching long across the sand, creating pockets of cooling shade that are immediately claimed by resting animals and humans alike. Malu gestures dramatically toward the water. "Ah, the reward of persistence," he says, "though persistence often smells faintly like dust." You chuckle softly, appreciating the gentle humor. The oasis is both a practical destination and a ritualistic pause, a place to rest, share news, and prepare for the next leg of the journey. You kneel by the pool, dipping your hands into the cool water. The sensation is almost electric against your sun-warmed skin. Nearby, traders exchange small pieces of information, trading news of markets, weather, and other caravans. Mainstream historical fact is that these informal gatherings were critical to the transmission of information across vast distances, a network without maps or letters, entirely dependent on human interaction and memory. The quirky detail? Some traders would deliberately plant humorous rumors or exaggerated tales to amuse companions or deter rivals. Historians still debate whether these stories were practical, protective, or purely for entertainment, but you find yourself enjoying the realm of oral culture unfolding around you. You recline beneath a palm, the gentle hum of conversation, camels, and wind blending into a calming symphony. Shadows lengthen, the sky deepens into muted shades of violet and orange, and the soft glow of twilight wraps the desert in an almost magical serenity. For a moment, you feel entirely present, attuned to every subtle vibration of life in this oasis, the flowing water, the shifting sand, the whisper of leaves, and the steady rhythm of the caravan.
A soft joke drifts from a nearby trader about a camel that allegedly refused to drink because it preferred the reflection of the sun in the water. Laughter ripples quietly, blending seamlessly with the peaceful ambiance. You note how humor, observation, and shared experience are woven into the very fabric of the silent routes, reinforcing bonds and easing the mind. As night approaches, you watch shadows deepen and stars begin to twinkle faintly in the expanding sky. The caravan settles into the oasis, camels kneeling, humans arranging bedding, and soft conversations drifting lazily into the cooling air. You lean back against a palm,
the day's journey folding into memory, a gentle awareness of rhythm, observation, and camaraderie settling into your consciousness. Tales of the silent routes, with their deliberate pacing and intricate balance between silence and human connection, are a true testament to the human experience. Historians still debate whether the quiet rituals, subtle observations, and playful anecdotes were strictly practical, symbolic, or a mix of both. But sitting here, you can feel the balance perfectly. You understand that the silent routes are more than pathways. They are lessons in patience, observation, humor, and harmony with the environment.
Night has settled softly over the oasis, and the sky is a vast, deep indigo, sprinkled with stars so numerous they seem to hum with their own quiet energy. You stand by the reflective pool, watching the camels kneel and drink, their movements precise and unhurried. The gentle rustle of palm leaves, stirred by a mild breeze, blends with the low murmurs of the traders, checking packs, whispering plans, and teasing each other in a tone softened by fatigue. It's an atmosphere that feels more like meditation than labor, and you notice your own heartbeat slowing to match the rhythm of the oasis. Tarek signals for the caravan to settle, and you find a shaded spot under a palm, laying down your small mat and adjusting your scarf to the cool night air. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind. Nubian traders often used oases as night stops, not merely for water, but to perform maintenance on equipment, check camel health, and pass along messages to neighboring caravans. These pauses were as strategic as they were restorative, and failing to respect the cycle could result in mishaps on the next day's trek. A fringe detail emerges as Melu begins arranging tiny pebbles along the path, carefully spacing them into a loose pattern. Some say it helps guide the desert spirits, he whispers. Historians still argue whether these rituals were symbolic, practical, or a mix of both, but you can't help noticing the delicate precision with which each pebble is placed. Perhaps it's about guidance, perhaps about superstition, or maybe simply about leaving one's mark gently on the world. The camels, having quenched their thirst, settled into a rhythm of gentle chewing and occasional soft hums. You watch a young camel lift its head and sniff the air, a subtle ritual of awareness repeated countless times along these silent routes. Its instincts are sharp, honed by centuries of genetic adaptation and training. The mainstream fact is clear. Nubian traders relied heavily on the camel's senses to detect approaching sandstorms, predators, and even distant water sources. As you stretch out, the desert night settles deeper. You notice the interplay of shadows from palm fronds across the sand, shifting with the gentle breeze. The subtle movements of light and shadow provide both beauty and information, marking positions and the passage of time in ways modern travelers might overlook. Quirkier practices appear in small rituals among the traders. One places a dried date at the base of a palm. Another murmurs softly to a camel, as if recounting the day's journey. These small gestures might be charm, superstition, or simple tradition. Historians still debate the exact motivations, but the effect is tangible. A soft, shared rhythm that ties humans, animals, and landscape together. A soft joke drifts from the edge of the camp. If only these camels wrote maps, someone whispers. Laughter ripples gently, low and unobtrusive, harmonizing with the sound of wind through the palms. The humor feels more like a nudge to the senses, a reminder to stay present than attentive without strain. You observe Tarek as he tends to a camel's saddle, adjusting straps with meticulous care. His hands move with practiced precision, a combination of muscle memory and deep understanding of animal behavior. This is a mainstream fact. Proper saddle adjustment and load distribution were critical for long treks, ensuring camels could endure the long, hot days without injury or resistance.
The quirky bit comes when Melu produces a small carved figure, a tiny camel,
he insists must accompany every trader during the night to ensure dreams of safe travel. Or mischief will find you in your sleep, he adds with a wink. Historians still argue whether these tiny figurines were widespread superstitions or simply playful charms carried by individual traders, but the effect on morale seems undeniable. Night deepens further, and you feel the hypnotic rhythm of the caravan still lingering despite the pause. You notice how small movements, the swish of a tail, the shuffle of sand, the flicker of shadows, form an intricate network of signals connecting humans and animals. Observation is constant, even in rest, and your own senses attuned to the delicate symphony around you. A fringe practice surfaces. Some traders whispered stories to their camels before sleep, recounting the day's journey or warning of tricky sand patches ahead. Historians debate whether camels actually responded or if it was purely psychological for the humans. But sitting here, you feel a sense of calm, as if the words themselves are absorbed into the night air. The oasis reflects the stars, turning the water into a second sky. You kneel beside it, dipping fingers into the cool liquid, feeling a tactile reminder of survival, continuity, and shared purpose. The reflection reminds you that observation, care, and rhythm are as crucial to memory as they are to survival. You notice small patterns in the sand, tiny depressions made by insects, subtle undulations left by wind, faint traces of other travelers. Each detail conveys information silently, as if the desert itself is communicating. The mainstream historical fact reinforces this. Traders often learned to read these small signals, to predict water, obstacles, and the best camping spots. The evening grows quieter, with only the whisper of wind, soft camel hums, and the gentle voices of the traders. A final quirky anecdote. Some traders claimed that the stars themselves acted as guides, aligning above certain dunes or oases to indicate safe passage. Historians still argue whether such celestial guidance was purely observational or intertwined with symbolic belief, but the night sky certainly reinforces the rhythm of travel. You stretch out beneath the palms, feeling the soft sand supporting you, the wind brushing lightly across your skin, and the gentle presence of camels resting nearby. The oasis hums softly with life, a subtle orchestra that eases your mind and body into quiet reflection. You feel part of something timeless, a tradition of observation, patience, rhythm, and subtle humor passed down across generations of traders navigating these silent routes. As the stars deepen, you close your eyes briefly, absorbing the calm and the gentle lessons of the desert night. Everything, the sand, the water, the animals, the humans, is part of a silent, continuous story. And you, for tonight, are an attentive listener.
Dawn approaches slowly, brushing the horizon with muted apricot and soft lavender. You stretch and rise, feeling the cool desert sand still clinging faintly to your hands and ankles. The oasis is quiet, the camels stirring gently as the first hints of morning light reflect off the water, creating a soft shimmer across the palms. The hum of the night has faded, leaving a delicate anticipation for the day's journey. You notice how the desert, in its transition from night to day, teaches patience, observation, and a subtle sense of timing. Tarek signals for the caravan to prepare for departure. You notice how efficiently the traders move, each aware of tasks and timing without needing verbal instruction. Mainstream historical fact. Nubian caravans were highly organized, relying on generational knowledge of routines to optimize travel, conserve resources, and anticipate environmental challenges. You watch as camels are checked, loads adjusted, and subtle markers reviewed to ensure the path is safe. Malu strolls along, humming softly, pointing out minute details in the sand,
depressions from previous travelers, faint shadows indicating wind shifts, and tiny plants resilient enough to survive even in the harsh desert. Fringe lore suggests that some traders believed these resilient plants were messengers from the desert, subtly guiding or warning them. Historians still argue whether such beliefs were practical, observational, or symbolic, but the effect is undeniable. They encouraged careful, attentive travel. You lead the caravan across a gentle slope, feeling the soft undulations of the sand beneath your feet. Shadows stretch long in the early light, highlighting every subtle ridge and hollow. The mainstream fact here is that experienced traders could navigate purely by memory, light, wind, and terrain cues, often traveling hundreds of kilometers without maps or written instructions. You marvel at the depth of human adaptation and the lessons embedded in routine observation. A quirky anecdote drifts into your awareness as Malou gestures toward a particularly stubborn camel. "He refuses to climb that dune," he whispers with a conspiratorial grin. "Claims it doesn't meet his aesthetic standards." You chuckle, noting how humor, even subtle and low-key, eases the monotony and tension of long treks. Historians still debate whether such personification of animals was common or an occasional whimsical habit, but the effect on morale is clear. The caravan ascends a ridge, revealing a sweeping view of the surrounding desert. Faint lines in the sand hint at ancient routes, sun-bleached tracks of previous caravans, and the ever-changing patterns sculpted by wind and time. You notice how the desert's impermanence, every footprint, every sand ripple, contrasts with the permanence of the knowledge carried by these traders. It's a gentle paradox. The environment shifts constantly, yet wisdom persists through memory, observation, and subtle documentation.
You spot a small figure partially hidden in the sand, a tiny carved object, perhaps a guardian marker or a playful token left by a previous caravan. Tarek kneels to examine it, tracing lines worn smooth by wind and time. Fringe detail. Some traders believe these carvings carried messages from those who came before, offering guidance or protection. Historians still debate whether these practices were widespread, symbolic, or largely idiosyncratic, but you feel a quiet reverence for the continuity they represent. The morning wind picks up slightly, ruffling clothes and hair, creating a soft, hypnotic hiss over the dunes. You notice how subtle shifts in temperature and airflow can reveal hidden depressions, soft sand patches, or signs of distant water sources. Mainstream historical evidence supports the idea that Nubian traders developed a highly tuned sensory awareness, allowing them to interpret subtle environmental cues with incredible accuracy. Quirky details emerge as Malou points out a tiny spiral of sand left by wind, a natural sculpture, he claims, probably trying to communicate with us. Laughter ripples softly through the caravan, blending into the hum of morning preparation. Historians still argue whether attention to such features had practical roots or were purely aesthetic observations, but the desert rewards attentiveness no matter the motive. You notice a faint trail of small footprints intersecting the path, foxes, lizards, and even insects. Each marks the terrain, communicates with the ecosystem, and offers subtle information to those trained to interpret it. Mainstream fact: awareness of animal tracks could indicate water, predator presence, or terrain instability, all critical for survival in the silent routes. The caravan approaches a low ridge, the sun now fully risen, casting a warm, diffused light that softens the harshness of the dunes. You sense a gentle acceleration in movement, not forced, but a natural rhythm as the desert responds to the growing warmth. Camels move with a deliberate, steady sway, humans adjusting pace to match the natural flow. Malou, with a conspiratorial glance, whispers about a legendary fox that supposedly guides lost travelers through the dunes, only revealing the safest paths to those who notice details and remain patient. Historians still debate the truth of these tales, but their presence reflects the blend of practical observation and narrative tradition that defines silent route culture. The caravan descends a gentle valley, wind carrying fine grains of sand that tickle your skin. Each step is deliberate, measured, and observant. You notice the subtle interplay of shadow and light, moisture pockets that indicate hidden water, and traces of previous travelers merging into the terrain. It's a landscape alive with both history and subtle whimsy. As midday approaches, the caravan pauses briefly on a compact stretch of sand, allowing camels to rest and water to be rationed. Traders whisper about distant markets, past adventures, and subtle environmental changes that might influence the route ahead. Mainstream fact, these micro-pauses were essential for recalibration, both for animals and humans, allowing observation and mental notes to align with reality. Quirkier elements appear as Malou rearranges small sticks into patterns that mimic camels' footprints. Perhaps the desert will confuse itself and guide us faster, he jokes softly. Historians still debate the prevalence of such playful rituals, but they clearly contribute to a shared rhythm, attentiveness, and morale. The caravan resumes movement, sliding across gently undulating dunes, shadows shifting and changing as the sun climbs higher. You feel an almost hypnotic alignment with the rhythm of movement, the subtle wind and the soft sway of camels, realizing that this gentle harmony has been cultivated over centuries. Silent routes are not just pathways, they are orchestrated experiences, blending observation, humor, and human ingenuity.
The sun climbs higher, spilling warm light across the undulating dunes, painting subtle gradients in every curve and depression of the sand. You trudge along, matching the swaying rhythm of the camels, feeling the gentle pull of their bodies beneath your hands. The desert is alive, but in a quiet, unobtrusive way. Every ripple, shadow, and gust of wind carries information if you care to notice. You begin to sense how the silent routes are more than pathways. They are a living, breathing archive of observation and experience. Tarek points toward a faint ridge in the distance. "Notice the color change," he says softly. The sand appears slightly darker, almost damp, though the heat is already climbing. Mainstream historical fact. Nubian traders were adept at detecting subtle variations in sand color and texture, which indicated moisture, compactness, or even hidden depressions. Your mind tunes in, observing the subtle shifts, feeling a quiet satisfaction at small discoveries. The fringe detail appears as Malou crouches beside a tiny clump of resilient grass. Some claim the desert plants whisper advice if you listen carefully, he says with a soft grin. Historians still argue whether this was a poetic exaggeration or a genuine interpretive practice, but you find yourself subconsciously scanning for patterns, the desert's quiet dialogue sinking into your senses. The caravan ascends a gentle slope, the camel's rhythmic swaying blending seamlessly with the whisper of wind over the sand. You notice how experienced traders like Tarek and Malou move with minimal effort, adjusting loads, pace, and posture with subtle signals that communicate to both humans and animals. Mainstream fact. This nonverbal coordination was critical for maintaining caravan cohesion, especially when traversing difficult or deceptive terrain. A playful moment arises when a younger trader missteps slightly on a compacted patch of sand, prompting a soft chuckle from Malou. "Even the sand has opinions," he whispers. Humor, gentle and understated, pervades the caravan. Historians still debate how much such playfulness contributed to morale versus being occasional levity, but it undeniably smooths the monotony of long desert travel. You pause briefly on the slope to observe faint tracks.
Previous travelers, animals, and wind-sculpted ridges intersect in an intricate dance. Mainstream historical observation shows that such patterns were read carefully to anticipate water sources, soft sand, or hidden depressions, subtle but essential cues for navigation. You kneel, tracing the contours with your fingers, marveling at the desert's subtle intelligence. The fringe element emerges in Malou's commentary on small stone arrangements along the path. Some traders believe these stones carry luck, others secret warnings. Historians still argued to which degree these markers were functional versus symbolic, but their presence adds a layer of narrative richness, embedding culture and story directly into the landscape. As you descend into a shallow valley, the heat grows slightly, offset by a soft breeze stirring the sand into delicate waves. Camels adjust their steps, humans match rhythm, and the desert's subtle cues guide your motion. You note how shadows shift, revealing minor depressions or compacted areas where a camel could stumble. Mainstream fact: this environmental literacy was key to safe passage, especially in less traveled regions.
A light-hearted quip drifts from Malou. If only the desert wrote us a manual. You laugh quietly, sensing the gentle humor threading through every movement and observation. Historians still debate the oral versus symbolic traditions in caravan culture, but playfulness clearly softened the rigor of daily travel. You notice a tiny cluster of dried leaves, partially hidden in the sand. Tarek crouches, pointing out that similar signs indicated past travelers or nearby water sources. Fringe detail: some traders swore these small traces could guide fortune or misfortune subtly. Historians still argue the practicality versus ritualistic interpretation, but the desert's lessons are clear. Attentiveness pays. The caravan pauses at a gentle slope to adjust packs, rest camels, and share minimal conversation. The air hums with rhythm, wind, and movement. Mainstream fact: these pauses, often brief and carefully timed, maintained health, morale, and observational sharpness across long treks. You breathe deeply, appreciating the quiet utility of stillness. Malou gestures toward a faint spiral of sand, nearly imperceptible. The desert sculpts its own art, he says softly. The playful side of silent routes is apparent here. Traders appreciated aesthetic patterns as subtle guides, reminders, or entertainment, blending observation with human creativity. Historians still debate how intentional such markings were, but they illustrate the deep connection between travelers and terrain. You continue moving, descending toward a small depression where faint greenery hints at hidden water. Camels pick up their pace slightly, alert to environmental cues. Mainstream fact: the animal's instincts were as crucial as human knowledge in detecting approaching oases, depressions, or hazards. You observe, amazed at the seamless integration of human and animal perception. As the day progresses, the rhythm of travel becomes meditative. Wind, sun, sand, and movement form a quiet orchestra. Fringe details, stories, playful markers, whispered traditions interlace with practical knowledge, creating a tapestry of experience that is part observation, part culture, and part gentle humor. Historians still argue over the symbolic versus practical importance of these traditions, but their presence is undeniable. The camels and traders begin a slow ascent toward a distant ridge. You notice the interplay of light and shadow stretching across dunes, the subtle color shifts in sand, and the wind patterns that create miniature ripples. Mainstream historical observation confirms that such cues were essential for long-range navigation, allowing traders to anticipate challenges and maintain safety without modern tools. A final quirk: Malu points out a small, oddly shaped stone, claiming it resembles a camel waving goodbye. The caravan chuckles quietly. Humor and observation remain intertwined, a subtle guide to both survival and human connection. You continue upward, attuned to every detail, every shift, and every nuance of the living desert. The ridge stretches before you, bathed in late morning sunlight that softens harsh contrasts and casts long, delicate shadows across the dunes. You ascend slowly, feeling the gentle pull of gravity as your feet sink slightly into the warm, yielding sand. Camels move with their habitual sway, their padded feet absorbing each step and creating an almost musical rhythm against the desert's soft terrain. You notice how the subtle sounds of movement, hoof, foot, and shifting pack blend into a calming background hum that matches your own heartbeat. Tariq signals a slight pause, gesturing toward faint tracks on the ridge. Mainstream historical fact: Nubian traders relied heavily on the careful observation of previous travelers' traces, reading depth, direction, and spacing to anticipate obstacles or potential water sources. You crouch to examine the impressions, noting the differences in depth, some bearing the weight of a heavily laden camel, others showing the quick, light touch of a lone traveler. Each mark tells a story, silent yet eloquent. Malu crouches beside a small patch of hardy desert grass, brushing sand aside to reveal tiny, resilient roots. Fringe detail: some traders believed these plants were desert messengers, their growth patterns hinting at hidden water or subtle shifts in terrain. Historians still debate whether these interpretations were symbolic or practical, but you find yourself drawn in to the meticulous act of observation, aware of every tiny shift and nuance. The ridge offers a sweeping view of dunes stretching toward the horizon, an almost liquid expanse of beige and gold. The mainstream fact: Nubian traders used distant visual cues such as dune shape, shadow orientation, and color variation to plan daily travel distances and anticipate the safest paths. You follow Tariq's subtle hand gestures, marking the contours with your eyes, imagining the countless travelers who once used the same techniques. A gentle joke breaks the calm. Malu whispers about a camel that supposedly refused to ascend a similar ridge out of principle, drawing soft laughter from the caravan. Humor, understated and gentle, threads through the journey, offering levity and human connection amidst the otherwise intense attentiveness demanded by the desert. Historians still debate the cultural prevalence of such light-hearted storytelling, but its effect on morale is undeniable. You notice a faint spiral pattern in the sand, almost imperceptible unless crouched and attentive. Tariq points it out as a potential marker left intentionally by previous travelers. Fringe detail: some traders believed such spirals brought luck or guided the weary traveler. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread or occasional, but you feel a sense of continuity, a quiet lineage of observation and tradition etched into the terrain. As you continue the ascent, the sun climbs higher, warming the air and causing faint mirages to shimmer on distant dunes. Mainstream fact: Nubian caravans relied on visual cues to differentiate between actual water sources and deceptive mirages, developing an almost instinctual ability to interpret desert light. You find yourself squinting against the brightness, noticing subtle color shifts and shadow play that hint at terrain variations. The caravan moves in a slow, meditative rhythm. Camels step with precise weight distribution.
Humans adjust loads almost imperceptibly, and the desert seems to breathe around you. Fringe detail. Some traders swore that the desert responded to attentiveness. Paths became easier, and hazards appeared less severe for those paying careful attention. Historians still debate the validity of this belief, though its psychological effect is undeniable.
A playful moment occurs when a young trader accidentally steps into a shallow sand depression, stumbling slightly. Malu chuckles softly. "Even the sand has a sense of humor," he says. The caravan smiles quietly, laughter mingling with wind, reinforcing a culture of observation, patience, and gentle amusement. You pause to examine subtle tracks, lizard prints, beetle scuttles, and faint signs of desert foxes. Mainstream fact: knowledge of these small creatures and their habits often provided critical survival information, from indicating nearby water to signaling predator presence. You crouch, tracing tiny lines in the sand, feeling an almost intimate connection to the environment. The ridge begins a gradual descent, and you notice how light reflects differently across minor depressions, hinting at the sand's varying texture. Fringe detail. Some traders left playful markers to entertain or challenge subsequent travelers, embedding culture and observation directly into the landscape. Historians still debate the practical versus symbolic nature of such beliefs, but the observation practice itself was unquestionably beneficial. As you reach a gentle plateau, camels kneel briefly to rest, and traders check loads with precise, practiced motions. Mainstream fact: these small pauses were essential for maintaining endurance, reducing heat stress, and ensuring animals remain cooperative and uninjured. You breathe deeply, absorbing the calm, quiet rhythm of shared work and observation. Malu gestures toward a distant dune, claiming it resembles a reclining camel when viewed from this angle. The caravan chuckles softly, appreciating the subtle humor woven into the routine. Fringe detail. Some traders left playful markers to entertain or challenge subsequent travelers, embedding culture and observation directly into the landscape. Historians still debate how common this practice was, but its presence is a delightful touch. You continue along the plateau, attuned to light, shadow, wind, and sound. Every subtle shift in sand, every gentle sound of camels and humans, and every faint whisper of the desert itself forms a continuous narrative. Mainstream fact: this sensory attentiveness allowed traders to navigate effectively across vast, uncharted landscapes, often without written maps or compasses. By late morning, the caravan reaches another low dune that hints at a hidden depression beyond. You pause, appreciating the harmony of movement, observation, and gentle humor that defines the silent routes. Fringe detail. Some traders left playful markers to entertain or challenge subsequent travelers, embedding culture and observation directly into the landscape. Historians still debate the validity, but the tradition shapes perception.
The ridge opens toward a faint horizon, and you feel a satisfying alignment of body, mind, and environment, a meditative, attentive immersion in the silent desert. Every step, glance, and gesture contributes to a rhythm cultivated over centuries, blending practicality, subtle humor, and cultural storytelling into the continuous experience of the silent routes.
The sun is now high, spilling warm, golden light across the dunes, casting subtle shadows that twist and shift with every gentle ripple in the sand. You trudge along the gentle incline, the camels swaying in time with your own measured steps. The desert hums quietly, a soft backdrop of wind brushing over dunes,
the occasional distant call of a desert bird, and the faint shuffle of camel hooves creating a hypnotic, almost meditative rhythm. You feel attuned to it, each movement an act of both observation and participation. Tarek pauses, pointing toward a series of faint, irregular ridges ahead. "See the darker patches?" he murmurs. Mainstream historical fact. Nubian traders could interpret variations in sand color and texture as indicators of moisture, hidden soft spots, or subtle changes in elevation. Knowledge crucial for safe passage and camel endurance. You crouch to examine the grains, feeling the slight difference in temperature and compactness, appreciating how finely tuned their observation had to be. Melu kneels near a small cluster of rocks, brushing away sand to reveal tiny fossilized shells embedded within. Fringe detail. Some traders regarded such natural relics as guides or omens, subtle messages from the land itself. Historians still debate whether this practice had any widespread functional purpose or was largely symbolic, but you can feel the quiet reverence in the gestures and attention. You climb slowly over the ridge, taking in a sweeping panorama of dunes stretching like molten gold in all directions. Mainstream fact. Traders used these distant views to chart daily progress, plan rest stops, and anticipate terrain challenges without formal maps. You notice the subtle variations in dune shapes, color, and shadow, sensing the desert's silent communication. A gentle quip breaks the quiet. Melu points to a particularly steep dune, whispering that a camel once refused to climb it, claiming it was too pretentious. You chuckle softly, sensing the undercurrent of humor that helps maintain morale during long, repetitive stretches. Historians still debate whether such personification of animals was common practice, but the effect on human psychology seems clear. The caravan begins a slow descent, following a faint depression where shadows darken slightly, hinting at compacted sand or hidden water channels. Mainstream fact. Reading these subtle cues could prevent accidents, hidden sinkholes, or overexertion. You crouch to feel the surface with your fingers, noting slight differences in moisture, temperature, and grain size. Fringe traditions appear in small rituals. Melu arranges a few stones in a circular pattern near a lone shrub. "For safe passage," he whispers, winking. Historians still debate the prevalence of such minor ceremonial practices, but you notice how they contribute to attentiveness, rhythm, and even gentle amusement during travel. You observe faint animal tracks, lizards, desert foxes, and beetles, all subtly intersecting with human and camel traces. Mainstream historical fact. Skilled traders could interpret these markings to gauge water proximity, predator presence, or terrain consistency. You trace the lines with your hand, marveling at the silent dialogue between creatures, humans, and landscape. The sun continues to climb, highlighting subtle contours and dunes, creating miniature valleys and ridges that shift with every passing breeze. Fringe anecdote. Some traders believed attentive travelers might notice hidden voices in these patterns, gentle whispers of previous caravans guiding their steps. Historians still debate whether such beliefs were symbolic or functional, but the attentiveness required undoubtedly enhanced survival.
You pause on a small plateau, camels kneeling briefly to rest, adjusting loads and checking packs. Mainstream fact. These micropauses were critical for maintaining camel health, preventing dehydration, and allowing humans a moment to recalibrate senses and stamina. You inhale the warm, dry air, feeling the meditative rhythm of the journey settle into your awareness. Melu produces a tiny clay figurine of a camel, placing it carefully on a rock. Fringe detail. Some traders carried these small charms, believing they carried luck, guidance, or subtle protection during the trek. Historians still debate the symbolic versus practical significance, but you find the gesture charming and calming, a tactile connection to centuries of tradition. The ridge gradually descends toward a hidden depression,
the terrain softening into a gentle valley dotted with sparse shrubs. You notice how light interacts with each curve, the wind tracing miniature lines across the sand that seem to shimmer subtly in motion. Mainstream fact, the ability to read such visual cues was a refined skill, cultivated through long experience and passed down through generations. A soft joke drifts from Malu. Watch your step, or the desert will file a complaint. Laughter ripples quietly, blending seamlessly with the sound of wind and soft camel hums. Humor, attentiveness, and observation merge into a gentle cadence that defines the silent routes. You and the caravan continue into the valley, each step measured and intentional. Every ripple of sand, every subtle shift of shadow, and every sound contributes to a continuous learning process, merging sensory observation, tradition, and mild amusement into the experience of navigation. Historians still debate how much ritual, play, and symbolic storytelling influenced practical travel, but the rhythm and attentiveness are indisputable. By late morning, the valley opens toward a faint oasis in the distance, palms swaying gently in a breeze that carries hints of water and shade. Camels pick up their pace slightly, sensing what humans can only imagine. Mainstream fact, Nubian traders relied on both animal instinct and careful observation of environmental cues to anticipate such stops. You take a deep breath, absorbing the interplay of light, movement, and subtle signals, feeling fully immersed in the timeless flow of the silent routes. The oasis emerges gradually, framed by soft, swaying palms and the glimmer of water reflecting sunlight in gentle ripples. You notice the camels quicken their steps almost imperceptibly, guided by instinct honed over generations. The desert's heat has become more intense, but the anticipation of cool water and shade infuses the caravan with quiet energy. Mainstream historical fact, Nubian traders strategically timed their journeys to reach oases at mid-morning or early afternoon, optimizing hydration for both humans and animals while avoiding the peak desert heat. You step closer to the edge of the oasis, feeling the sand change underfoot, slightly damp, denser, with a subtle earthy aroma. Fringe detail. Some traders whispered that oases had their own spirits and that respectful attention and minor offerings could ensure safe passage. Historians still debate whether such beliefs were widespread or localized, but the rituals added a layer of mindfulness to arrival, enhancing both awareness and calm. Camels kneel gracefully, lowering their long necks to drink. You watch the water ripple, seeing distorted reflections of swaying palms and the sky above. Mainstream fact, camel hydration at oases was critical, allowing them to regain stamina for the long stretches of open desert ahead. Observing the process, you gain a deep appreciation for the delicate balance of travel and survival. Malu produces a small bundle of dates, offering them to each traveler with a soft smile. Fringe anecdote. Some traders insisted on sharing sweet fruits first with camels, believing it ensured loyalty and cooperation. Historians still argue whether this practice had practical or symbolic origins, but it subtly reinforces communal care and gentle humor. You wander along the water's edge, noticing tiny ripples made by insects skimming the surface and dragonflies hovering briefly before darting away. Mainstream fact. Such subtle observations helped traders gauge water quality and the presence of small aquatic life, offering indirect clues about the oasis's reliability and environmental stability. You pause to marvel at the intricate, quiet ecosystem thriving amid harsh desert conditions. A light joke drifts from Malu. If only these dragonflies could tell us which dune to climb next.
Laughter floats across the oasis, blending with the gentle splash of camels and the whisper of palm leaves. Humor softens attention, transforming repetitive observation into shared amusement. Historians still debate how often playful commentary accompanied practical travel, but it clearly formed a gentle rhythm. You notice a faint, almost invisible trail along the sand, partially covered by shifting grains. Tarek points it out. Previous travelers have passed here recently, their subtle traces guiding the next caravan. Mainstream fact. Following or interpreting these barely visible tracks was a crucial skill, allowing traders to anticipate terrain hazards or locate water efficiently. You kneel, tracing lines delicately with your fingers, feeling a quiet connection to generations of travelers. Fringe practices appear. Small pebbles are placed at intervals along a minor ridge leading to the water. Malu explains that some traders left these markers as silent signs for those who observed carefully. Historians still debate whether these markers were practical guides, symbolic gestures, or playful rituals, but their presence contributes to the careful attentiveness embedded in the silent routes.
The sun climbs higher, casting shadows that shift with the water and palms. You notice how even subtle movements, wind, bird flight, cloud shadows, alter the interplay of light and dark across the sand and vegetation. Mainstream historical fact. Nubian traders often use these visual cues to judge the day's progression, plan breaks, and anticipate shifts in terrain or temperature. Observing these subtle changes sharpens awareness, reinforcing survival skills honed over centuries. A quirky moment arises when Malu holds up a leaf and claims it resembles a camel mid-leap. You can't help smiling at the playful perception, and the caravan chuckles softly. Fringe detail. Such small amusements were woven into travel culture, blending observation, creativity, and humor. Historians still debate whether these practices were widespread, but they clearly reinforced attentiveness and camaraderie. You move closer to the water's edge to rinse your hands and face. The cool liquid contrasts sharply with the sun-warmed sand in your dry skin, creating a sensory reset. Mainstream fact. These rituals of washing or cooling were essential for maintaining hydration, body temperature, and comfort, subtly supporting long-term travel endurance. You pause to note the subtle interplay of shadow, water, and wind patterns around the oasis. Tiny whirlpools form near the shore as wind skims the water, while sunlit ripples highlight faint textures on the sand beneath. Fringe detail. Some traders interpreted these patterns as guidance or messages from the land. Historians still debate whether this symbolic reading was common, but it illustrates the blending of observation, tradition, and narrative that defined silent route travel. Camels finish drinking and kneel for brief rest, shaking their heads slowly. You observe Tarek adjusting saddles and checking loads, a precise routine repeated countless times in Nubian caravan history. Mainstream fact. Meticulous attention to load distribution prevented injuries and ensured animals remained cooperative for long journeys. You note the combination of human skill, animal instinct, and environmental awareness that underpins successful passage. As you stand and gaze across the oasis, you notice faint dunes rising beyond the palms, suggesting the next leg of the journey. Fringe anecdote. Some traders whispered that oases themselves subtly indicated the safest route forward, a desert intuition cultivated through attentiveness. Historians still debate whether such ideas were metaphorical, psychological, or practical, but the narrative reinforces the rhythm of observation, humor, and mindfulness embedded in the caravan's tradition.
You take a slow, deep breath, feeling the oasis, camels, and desert form a continuous, harmonious experience. Every subtle sound, visual cue, and small gesture contributes to an ongoing narrative that blends survival, humor, culture, and gentle attentiveness, a rhythm honed over centuries and quietly maintained along the silent routes.
The oasis slowly recedes behind you as the caravan resumes its journey, camels stepping with deliberate, rhythmic grace across the undulating sand. You notice the subtle changes in terrain, the shift from soft, damp sand near the water to firmer, wind-sculpted ridges that seem almost liquid under your feet. Mainstream historical fact: Nubian traders were trained to sense these subtle textural shifts, using them to choose safer paths, conserve camel energy, and anticipate hidden depressions. You feel your senses sharpening with each step, the desert teaching attentiveness in the quietest ways. Malu points toward a faint line in the sand stretching across a nearby dune. "A previous caravan passed this way," he whispers, his voice blending with the soft whisper of the wind. Fringe detail. Some traders believed that following these almost invisible lines, when done carefully, could bring luck or ensure protection. Historians still debate whether these beliefs were widely held or largely symbolic, but the practice reinforced careful observation, patience, and continuity across generations. The ridge rises slowly, and you trudge upward, each footfall sinking slightly into the yielding sand. Camels sway gently, creating a calming, repetitive rhythm that resonates with your own body movements. Mainstream fact: long-term travelers attuned themselves to this rhythm, which allowed for efficient pacing, minimized fatigue, and promoted harmony between human and animal movement. You begin to notice the meditative quality of this alignment, almost like a desert lullaby. A soft chuckle drifts from Malu as a camel momentarily halts, apparently inspecting a small pebble. "Even the camels have opinions on decor," he murmurs. Fringe detail. Traders often attributed whimsical personalities to camels, believing that humor and light-hearted observation strengthened bonds and maintained morale. Historians still debate whether this personification was widespread or occasional, but its effects on group cohesion are clear. You continue along the ridge, noting faint shadows stretching across rippling dunes, subtly indicating minor depressions or hidden soft patches. Mainstream fact: visual observation of such cues allowed traders to prevent accidents and maintain a steady pace. You lean down to trace a faint trail left by previous travelers, feeling a quiet connection with those who had crossed the same terrain centuries before. The wind picks up slightly, brushing against your skin and lifting tiny grains of sand. Fringe detail. Some traders considered the wind's direction, strength, and even sound to be subtle guides, an auditory map of sorts. Historians still argue about whether this practice was systematic or anecdotal, but its use demonstrates the depth of environmental literacy cultivated over generations. The caravan reaches a gentle dip in the sand, and you notice a tiny, solitary shrub peeking out from the pale landscape. Mainstream fact: traders used such vegetation as natural markers for navigation, estimating distance traveled and predicting nearby water sources. You pause to admire the shrub's resilience, a quiet testament to life persisting amid harsh conditions. A small joke emerges from Malu as he points to a peculiar sand formation resembling a reclining camel. "The dunes are practicing their modeling," he quips. Humor, understated and gentle, threads through the journey, providing relief and maintaining attention without disrupting the meditative rhythm. Historians still debate how consistently humor was integrated into travel routines, but its calming effect is undeniable.
You continue down the slight incline, the desert expanding in all directions with minimal interruption. Fringe anecdote: Some traders whispered about desert spirits watching over diligent travelers, ensuring attentive observers found the safest paths. Historians still debate the origin and prevalence of such beliefs, but their presence reinforces a culture of observation, mindfulness, and subtle narrative weaving. The sun climbs higher, casting sharper shadows and revealing minor textures in the sand, subtle undulations previously hidden. Mainstream fact, knowledge of these visual nuances allowed traders to maintain pace, avoid pitfalls, and anticipate changes in terrain before encountering them physically. You trace your fingers lightly over a smooth ridge, imagining the countless hands that had once done the same. The caravan ascends another low ridge, and you notice how wind patterns shape the sand into soft, flowing waves. Fringe detail. Some traders claim these wind-sculpted patterns were desert handwriting, subtle messages from the land. Historians still debate whether these were literal interpretations or metaphorical, but paying attention to such details undoubtedly enhanced observation skills. You reach the ridge's crest, pausing to take in a sweeping view of distant dunes and valleys, the desert a vast, textured expanse of gold, beige, and pale rose. Mainstream fact, such vantage points were critical for planning daily routes, estimating distances, and identifying hazards or resting points. You breathe in the desert air, feeling an almost hypnotic alignment with rhythm, observation, and the gentle humor embedded in travel culture. A light-hearted moment occurs as a camel hesitates briefly, sniffing a wind-carved mound. Malu whispers, "Even the sand is testing our attention." Laughter drifts softly across the ridge, blending seamlessly with the quiet ambient sounds. Fringe detail. Playful interactions with animals and landscape helped maintain morale, observational sharpness, and communal connection. Historians still debate the consistency of this practice, but the effect is apparent. You begin descending gently toward a hidden valley, the dunes stretching out like waves frozen in time. The caravan moves with quiet efficiency, each traveler attuned to the rhythm of movement, the subtle cues of sand and wind, and the soft humor that punctuates each mile. Mainstream fact, careful integration of observation, humor, and environmental literacy was essential to the survival and success of long Nubian trade journeys. The day's heat intensifies slightly, and you notice the gradual shift of sand color, the interplay of shadow and light, and the faint shimmer of distant terrain. Fringe anecdote. Some traders believed such visual cues could indicate invisible hazards or hidden water, cultivating a heightened attentiveness that bordered on instinct. Historians still debate the symbolic versus practical significance of these practices, but the meticulous attention clearly served survival needs. By late morning, the valley opens toward a distant cluster of dunes, hinting at the next oasis or resting point. You sense the gentle rhythm of progress, the quiet humor, and the meditative pace, the silent roots teaching lessons in patience, observation, and subtle delight in the desert's small wonders.
The dunes stretch before you in a softly undulating sea of gold and pale beige, the sunlight bouncing gently across each ridge and depression. You trudge forward, feeling the familiar sway of the camels beneath you and the gentle hum of wind across the sand, a meditative rhythm that seems to pulse in tandem with your own heartbeat. Mainstream historical fact. Nubian traders relied heavily on such repeated, rhythmic observation, synchronizing movement, animal care, and environmental attentiveness to maintain efficiency across long journeys. You notice how each step, each glance, each small adjustment of load or posture contributes to a continuous dialogue with the desert. Malu points toward a small, almost invisible spiral of sand near a ridge. Fringe detail. Some traders claimed these spirals were left as playful markers, subtle guides, or even messages for future travelers. Historians still debate whether these patterns were intentional, symbolic, or merely coincidental,
but their presence enriches the narrative of human interaction with the silent roots. You crouch to examine the spiral, tracing its curves with your fingers, imagining those who passed this way centuries ago. As the caravan ascends a gentle slope, the desert expands around you in vast, quiet majesty. Camels step with graceful precision. Humans adjust loads almost imperceptibly, and the soft interplay of wind, sand, and shadow forms a gentle orchestration. Mainstream fact: the ability to read these environmental cues ensured both safety and endurance, allowing caravans to cover long distances with minimal incident. You breathe deeply, appreciating the subtle education the desert imparts. A soft chuckle rises as a camel hesitates, sniffing a faintly darker patch of sand. Malou whispers, "Even the dunes have opinions on our route." Fringe anecdote: such light-hearted personification of animals was a cultural norm among traders, reinforcing observation, attentiveness, and group morale. Historians still debate how widely these practices were adopted, but the effect on community and focus is unmistakable. You trace faint tracks left by previous travelers, the impressions telling a quiet story of those who moved before you. Mainstream historical fact: interpreting these subtle markings was essential, from anticipating soft sand patches to estimating water availability and gauging travel speed. Each indentation in the sand forms a living archive, a whisper of centuries of experience. The sun climbs higher, casting shifting shadows that reveal tiny ridges and depressions in the dunes. Fringe detail: some traders believe these patterns were desert writing, subtle signals requiring attentive eyes to interpret. Historians still debate the literal versus metaphorical interpretation, but the practice reinforced mindfulness and honed survival instincts. You follow the shifting shadows carefully, noting subtle variations in texture, grain size, and light. A gentle joke drifts across the caravan as Malou points to a strangely shaped dune, remarking that it resembles a reclining camel with a bit of attitude. You laugh quietly, feeling the comfort of shared amusement, a tiny anchor amidst the vast desert expanse. Humor, understated and woven through observation, maintains attentiveness while easing monotony. The ridge begins a gradual descent toward a shallow valley, the camels adjusting their steps in a smooth, meditative rhythm. Mainstream fact: subtle coordination between human and animal movement minimized energy expenditure and prevented missteps in soft or unstable sand. You notice the delicate interplay, the shared understanding between species developed through centuries of co-traveling.
Fringe details arise in small rituals. Malou places a few stones in deliberate patterns along the path, whispering that attentive travelers would benefit from careful observation. Historians still debate the extent to which such practices were symbolic, ritualistic, or purely practical, but their presence underscores a culture where attentiveness, narrative, and gentle humor converge. You pause briefly to observe a cluster of desert shrubs, their sparse green leaves standing resilient against the sandy backdrop. Mainstream fact: vegetation acted as both environmental markers and subtle indicators of potential water sources or terrain shifts. You crouch to note textures and spacing, appreciating the desert's quiet guidance. The caravan continues across the valley, the rhythmic sway of camels, soft conversation, and whispered jokes blending with the ambient hum of wind and shifting sand. Fringe anecdote: traders often interpreted small, almost imperceptible changes, light glinting off sand, the movement of a distant bird, as subtle guidance.
forming a near mystical layer to practical navigation. Historians still debate whether such beliefs influenced decisions significantly, but the attentiveness they fostered was undeniably functional. As the sun moves westward, casting a gentle glow across dunes, you notice faint reflections on distant ridges, subtle hints of the next landmark or resting point. Mainstream fact, Nubian traders' ability to read these cues allowed them to maintain pace, anticipate shifts in terrain, and optimize stops without formal instruments. You follow the subtle visual shifts with keen awareness. A final, gentle joke emerges as a camel pauses dramatically mid-step, seemingly contemplating the next dune. Malu whispers, "Our dignified friend is judging our navigation skills." Laughter ripples quietly, blending seamlessly with wind in sand. Fringe detail, humor interspersed with observation kept travelers attentive and spirits light. Historians still debate prevalence, but its effect is clear. You feel a deep, meditative immersion in the desert. Every sand ripple, every shadow, every faint track contributes to an ongoing narrative of survival, humor, culture, and attentive observation. Mainstream fact, the integration of these practices formed the backbone of successful long-distance trade routes across Nubian deserts. You move forward, harmonizing with the rhythm, subtle guidance, and soft, gentle humor that has carried travelers for centuries.
The desert stretches outward like a quiet, golden ocean, and as you walk alongside your camel, you feel a deep, resonant calm settle into your limbs. Each gentle sway, each whisper of wind over sand carries you further into a meditative state, where thoughts soften and the mind begins to drift alongside the caravan. You notice the subtle warmth of the sun on your shoulders, the delicate brush of grains against your fingertips, the soft, rhythmic cadence of camel hooves against the desert floor. The desert is patient, forgiving, and infinitely wise, a teacher that offers lessons in silence, attentiveness, and gentle humor. You recall small moments from your journey, the faint spirals in the sand, the subtle tracks left by previous travelers, the playful interactions with camels, and the whispered stories of traders interpreting wind patterns, shadows, and vegetation. Each memory forms a thread in the tapestry of the silent routes, weaving together practicality, culture, and mindfulness into a quiet, immersive experience. The desert seems to breathe around you, each gust of wind shaping miniature waves in the sand, each shadow a fleeting hint of movement, each distant bird a tiny messenger of life persisting amid arid stillness. The oasis glimpsed earlier now feels like a distant memory, yet its coolness and the gentle ripple of water linger in your senses. You recall the calm of watching camels drink, the soft laughter exchanged over playful observations, and the meticulous attention paid to subtle cues, the changing colors of sand, the minute undulations of dunes, the faint traces of creatures moving unseen. These experiences blend, dissolving the boundary between observer and environment, creating a state of gentle alignment where each breath feels synchronized with the desert's rhythm. You notice the small joys tucked into the journey, a particularly sculpted dune resembling a reclining camel, the occasional whisper of wind through sparse shrubs, the tiny, resilient desert plants clinging to life against impossible odds. Fringe details, anecdotes, and light-hearted moments interweave seamlessly with historical facts, forming a soft, coherent narrative. Historians may debate the practicality, symbolism, or frequency of such practices, but the rhythm, attentiveness, and gentle humor they inspired are undeniable.
These are the subtle threads that make the silent routes not just a path through the desert, but a living story passed through generations. As the sun begins its slow descent, the shadows lengthen, stretching across dunes and valleys, softening their contours and bathing the sand in muted golds and pinks. You feel your steps slow naturally, your body attuned to the gentle cadence of travel. Camels kneel periodically, humans adjust loads and take measured pauses, and the desert holds you in a quiet embrace. You notice the subtle sound of wind brushing against your ears, the soft rustle of distant palm leaves, and the faint, almost imperceptible whisper of sand shifting underfoot. Each detail resonates, lulling your mind toward calmness and reflection. The stories of traders, both practical and whimsical, float through your consciousness, reminders of human ingenuity, resilience, and the subtle art of observation. You remember the delicate balance required to read the terrain, anticipate hazards, and interpret tiny environmental cues. You also recall the small doses of humor that eased monotony and maintained morale. These elements, so finely intertwined, create a continuous, flowing experience that nurtures mindfulness and a sense of gentle wonder.
Your breathing slows, synchronized with the soft rhythm of the camels, the faint hum of wind, and the almost musical cadence of shifting sand. Thoughts drift in a gentle current, untangling themselves as the desert itself seems to absorb excess tension, leaving behind only attentiveness, calm, and the faint echo of playful observation. You feel connected to the generations of Nubian traders who walked these same paths, who observed with patience, who laughed softly in shared moments, and who moved in harmony with the desert's subtle instructions. The last light of day softens the landscape, shadows merging with dunes, turning the vast golden expanse into a gently textured tapestry of muted tones. Your body relaxes, your mind unwinds, and a sense of quiet satisfaction settles in, a gentle acknowledgement of the desert's rhythm, the wisdom of centuries, and the soft humor woven into every step. The sand feels less like a barrier and more like a companion, guiding, instructing, and inviting you to rest within its timeless expanse. Slowly, softly, your awareness begins to fade into the quietude of the desert night. You carry with you the memory of silent roots, attentive observation, gentle humor, and a meditative rhythm that stretches across time. Every ripple in the sand, every whisper of wind, every faint trace of past travelers becomes part of the lullaby, wrapping you in calm, reflection, and soft, enduring wonder. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let yourself drift, carried gently by the silent roots and the whispers of the desert. Sweet dreams.
End of script. Sweet dreams.